I am really excited. I know it's been a long day, but you are in for a special treat with our next speaker. We are delighted that he has traveled all the way from Washington, D.C. to be with us and to share the outlook on United States trade, Ambassador Doug McKalip. I have been fortunate to know Doug. He is the epitome of a great public servant. He's been at USDA for about 30 years. I first met him when he was at the Natural Resources Conservation Service in public affairs. I thought it was 94, but somewhere in that 90s range. But he had a lot of different roles, not only at USDA, in APHIS and NRCS. He was over at the White House Rural Council, Domestic Policy Council, and so he's got this terrific background in understanding of agriculture that he brings to his job as the Chief Agricultural Negotiator for the Office of the United States Trade Representative. So without further ado, I'd like to have you join me in welcoming Ambassador McKalip to the stage, and then we'll have some discussion after his prepared comments. Doug?
Thank you, Sarah, very much. Appreciate that so much. Thank you, Sarah, for that introduction. It's great to see all of you here this afternoon. I wanted to take a moment, Sarah, just to thank the journalists who are in the room right now. And I think it's something that doesn't happen frequently enough. Agriculture is a very difficult subject to cover. We've got everything from trade and national security to sometimes meteorology, to plant disease and plant health issues, to rural development, very complex fiscal issues. And I just wanted to take a moment just to thank you, Sarah, for all that you do to help keep producers informed, to help keep traders informed, to help keep everyone in the agriculture and food system informed. It really is, I think, a task that doesn't go recognized often enough. So thank you to all you do and to the other journalists who are in the room here this afternoon. I was looking over the agenda. You all have covered a really excellent group of issues over the course of your program. And it really brought to mind for me how the intersection of trade connects with almost everything that you have been discussing here in the room this morning, from biologics and innovation to the future of automation to what the agriculture outlook looks like for yield and productivity. And at almost every juncture, a common connector really is trade. And that says that if a farmer is going to make an investment in many of the new innovations ahead, they need to be sure that they can be successful in exporting and trading in the commodity that they grow. Similarly, a lot of the decisions that are made about what the future of agriculture looks like will be dictated by and will be connected to international acceptance and the ability to profit and to be able to trade successfully in marketplaces around the globe. So I feel like your agenda today really touched on many issues that are key for me, many ones that are very important to the U.S. Trade Representative's Office. It's an honor to be before you here this afternoon in the role of Chief Agriculture Negotiator. And I just wanted to mention how much of an honor it is for me to serve for Ambassador Katherine Tai as the U.S. Trade Representative. She is an incredible advocate of worker-centered trade and farmer-centered trade policies, and she very much is a tireless advocate for ensuring that trade works for everyone. And so it has been a real pleasure and honor to serve with her and for her at the White House. In my role as Chief Agriculture Negotiator, I am very much an advocate and a face and a salesperson and a voice for the American farmer. American farmers produce some of the most high quality, best recognized, reliable, and incredibly consistent products anywhere in the globe. And I feel that in many ways, U.S. farm products sell themselves and their reputation precedes themselves around the world. But part of my role is to ensure that in cases where there is a willing buyer around the globe who is interested in, wants those high quality products, that there isn't a government somewhere around the globe that stands in between that farmer and a willing marketplace and a willing buyer. So that is really the focus for my office within the U.S. Trade Representative. Our agriculture office team works tirelessly on behalf of U.S. farmers, ranchers, foresters to ensure that they can connect around the globe in those international marketplaces. To set the stage for a couple topics, I just wanted to note that just a few months ago we announced record trade numbers and record export numbers for U.S. agriculture. Almost $200 billion, the level is actually $196 billion in export for U.S. agriculture, which is impressive, but I think even more impressive when you compare that number to just a few short years ago. We were at $137 billion just about 4 years ago. So that is a 30% increase in agricultural exports just over a few-year period. And I think, again, that's a testament to the high-quality product that U.S. farmers and ranchers bring to the marketplace every day. For me and for our team, it's also a challenge. It's a challenge to keep our foot on the accelerator, to make sure that we are working hard to continue that market access and to expand opportunities for U.S. farm trade around the globe in every place that we can. Because it's clear with producer input cost, with some of the challenges that they face economically in terms of headwinds for U.S. trade, that it is incumbent upon us to do everything we can to make sure that doors are opening around the globe for U.S. products. So I want to hit on just a couple key successes that we've had already in 2023, so just in the past 4 months on U.S. agricultural trade. So in January, Japan announced an updated agreement revising its beef import safeguard mechanism. So this will allow U.S. exporters to reliably meet Japan's growing demand for high-quality beef, and it'll avoid tariffs and duties placed on those U.S. beef products. For a sense of scale, U.S. beef to Japan totaled over $2.3 billion in 2022, and Japan is recognized as the second largest importer of U.S. beef anywhere in the globe. More recently, Japan also, this happened in April, they implemented a new biofuels policy in Japan that will allow the United States to capture up to 100% of Japan's on-road ethanol marketplace. So just to give you a feeling for what this could mean, we're talking about 80 million gallons annually, or about $200 million in export funds each year based upon Japan ethanol. Turning to India, India actually reduced its tariff on U.S. pecans from 70% down to 30% earlier this year. That actually happened, I think it was my first or second week on the job when Ambassador Tai, I and others from USTR met with the Indian government. They also eliminated their tariff altogether on ethanol, and they also made reductions in their tariff on certain animal feed imports as well. There certainly is a lot more work to do with India on a host of commodities, but clearly these were victories and wins in 2023 that I think can serve as a harbinger of things to come as we continue our engagement with them. The country of Jordan isn't one that you probably hear a whole lot about, but just 2 weeks ago, Jordan made a commitment to remove its MFN tariff of 20% on U.S. exports of fertilized eggs, and that was certainly a very welcome change from Jordan. And while this is a relatively small market, we feel that certainly there is an incredible potential in the Middle East, and this will be an area certainly that we will be spending a lot of time with trading partners in that region to achieve additional market access and additional favorable trading conditions for us. A couple other changes. Just last month, Bangladesh announced that it would remove fumigation requirements on cotton. This is a regulatory change that actually will help U.S. producers avoid a sunk cost for something that was scientifically unjustified, essentially to treat for a pest that they did not have. So that change in trade policy will certainly benefit us. And U.S. exports of cotton reached about $500 million last year. So that gives you a sense for the scale and the scope of what that could mean in terms of the change in policy. Just a couple other quick items. Both Asia and Europe have made additional approvals of U.S. biotech products for import. And these will be something that we'll continue to push for. And I'm going to talk in just a couple of minutes about why that's really important. So I don't have really time to run into each and every change in trade policy, but the ones I just rattled off all happened within the last 4 months, just in the first quarter of 2023. And they certainly are examples of the kinds of wins and the kinds of efforts that we will be putting a great deal of focus on throughout next year as well. Beyond opening up new markets, it's also part of the U.S. Trade Representative's job to also hold trading partners accountable and to call them out when they are not playing square on existing trade relationships as well. So I want to talk about just 2 items there that are very timely. The first has to do with Mexico and its approach to biotechnology. Just last week, USTR announced that it would begin formal dispute processes under the USMCA with Mexico over biotech. Based upon Mexico's policy on biotech, they have not been following sound regulatory processes. They have not been following science. And as a result, it's important for the U.S. to stand up for the correct scientific processes that were signed onto as part of USMCA. So this will begin effort under Chapter 31 of USMCA to work on dispute settlement with Mexico. This is an issue of vital importance, not just to corn growers in the U.S., but for everyone, because quite frankly, if trading partners are not following risk assessments in their regulatory work, that causes a major issue for all of agriculture, each and every commodity that's out there. Similarly, with respect to our neighbors to the north, we have recently launched a second case on Canada's dairy approach. The U.S. won its first case in November of 2021, but in response to that case, Canada has still not provided meaningful market access to dairy farmers from the United States. So our second case will focus in specifically on their existing shortcomings and where Canada has failed to provide meaningful retail and full market access to Canada. So these are examples, again, while we are on one hand working around the globe, opening up new places to new commodities, we also have to work hard to make sure that countries are, again, not doing a new favor for us, but that they are living up to what they signed when they signed on the dotted line on existing trade agreements. Beyond those 2 areas, I want to hit on what I think is the most important thing that I came to talk about here this afternoon. It has big implications for California, and quite frankly, it has really massive implications for all of U.S. agriculture, and that is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF. We are, the U.S., working with a dozen partners in Asia and the Pacific Basin on developing a path to deepen our economic relationship with our allies and partners in this region and to coordinate a new approach to global trading challenges. Specifically, we are tackling regulatory hurdles and logistical challenges that often get in the way of exporting products. And the reason I say that is that one of the things I have found in working in agricultural trade for a number of years is that we often spend a lot of our time trying to help farmers and help their companies and their supply chains navigate issues that pop up. Exporting and importing licenses expire. New hurdles are erected. Regulatory provisions are passed that suddenly don't make it as easy as it used to be for a U.S. farm product to enter that marketplace. And while we successfully troubleshoot those issues and we work tirelessly to make sure that those problems are fixed, there is another approach, and that is to avoid those problems from popping up in the first place. So the work in IPEF is going to allow us to establish regulatory certainty and transparency. It will allow us to ensure that countries are following science when they develop regulations and to ensure that they are accepting public comment when they develop those regulations. It's something we sort of take for granted in the U.S., that things will appear in the Federal Register, that things will go out for public comment, but oftentimes that's not the case. So IPEF gives us a very powerful vehicle to have not a dozen different regulatory approaches out there, but to have one regulatory approach that is consistent and transparent. Similarly, a major part of IPEF is to work on sustainability certainty also. The United States has tabled sustainability language as part of IPEV, and that is the first time that that has ever happened in an international multilateral trade document. And the goal behind that is to make sure that countries are not erecting trade barriers in the name of sustainability. We're here in California, and as Sarah mentioned a bit ago, I used to work for NRCS. And I think it's second nature to the farmers in California that any conservation planning, any work that would be done on soil erosion, any practices that would be implemented on water quality, all be done in a site-specific manner, that they be tailored to the soil type, that they be tailored to the crop that is being grown, that they be tailored to the amount of precipitation that you are getting or the type of irrigation that you're using. Well, unfortunately, these days we find many countries around the globe in the name of climate or sustainability discussions, putting in one-size-fits-all policy approaches, which end up being a real barrier and, quite frankly, in the long run, discourage farmers from making investments in stewardship and investments in conservation. So we are working very hard as part of IPEV to get sustainability language integrated into the agriculture chapter that will provide the kinds of site-specific flexibility that farmers deserve and honestly provide a much more conducive to trade environment on conservation and on the environment. So that's a really big area. Tomorrow, I'm going to visit the Port of Oakland to take a look at the terminals there, to work through logistical issues on exports. And it is my hope that as part of IPEV that we will set up an environment where the Port of Long Beach, the Port of Oakland, the Port of Seattle, the Port of Savannah, all these ports are even more busy with U.S. agricultural products that are heading to Asia. So many important marketplaces there, a growing middle class in places like Vietnam, in Singapore, in Indonesia, Thailand. It's a really important place for U.S. agriculture to place a lot of attention. And I just wanted to make sure that I left you with that as a major area of focus. And I hope everyone in agriculture can help get IPEV across the finish line, because I think it'll pay tremendous dividends for U.S. farmers and ranchers. Before I close, I just wanted to touch on a couple other areas quickly. And that one of them is making sure that trade works well for everyone. And this has been a central focus of Ambassador Tai. It's been an important theme of the Biden-Harris administration. Right after I leave this conference, I will travel out to nearby almond and walnut production farm. And I just wanted to highlight and emphasize for you that it is a major area of emphasis for USTR and for the White House to ensure that trade is reaching everybody and to make sure that every commodity is benefiting from the promise of trade. We have, a rallying cry in our office, and that is that there is no marketplace around the globe that is too small to spend time trying to open up that marketplace to U.S. farmers. And there is no commodity too small by volume for us not to spend time and effort trying to open up marketplaces around the globe for those commodities as well. And that goes for organics, it goes for biofuels, which I think is another area that requires a lot of attention, and it goes for all kinds of specialty crops, fruit and vegetables, et cetera. The last point I wanted to make, and I know that you all touched on this today in your conference, was the importance of innovation. Sarah and I were just talking a moment ago outside of this conference room how U.S. agriculture has always been a leader around the world in innovation. And I think in an era and in a time where folks are very concerned about sustainability, that it is very important that innovation continue to lead the way in U.S. agriculture, and that by an extension, that world trade policies recognize and encourage that kind of innovation. I'll use biotechnology as an example just for a moment. We know that through gene edits, using tools like CRISPR-Cas, that simple changes to a crop can be made that really mimic what could have otherwise been done in the greenhouse through traditional breeding. And that those changes can bring about benefits such as decreased water usage, better heat tolerance, better drought tolerance. All of those traits are ones that will, in the long run, provide important answers and important pieces of the puzzle toward future sustainability. So our team, and I know many of the folks in this room, we'll continue to push to make sure that international trade recognizes the important role that innovation plays. You all talked about biologics quite a bit today. Incredible opportunity and incredible benefits that can come about from that. So it'll be certainly a major focus for us in our trade discussions to make sure that innovation is encouraged as a means toward improved sustainability and to ensure that trading partners are not, in the end, discouraging the use of that technology. So with that, I want to close. I want to leave enough time for a little bit of discussion. I'm really interested to hear some of the things that may be on your mind. I'll be spending quite a bit of time here over the next couple of days in California, meeting with agricultural producers. We're traveling to Texas from here to meet with poultry producers, and then on to Florida to talk to livestock folks as well. And it's been certainly a very busy year for us internationally. But we want to do this to make sure that we are ensuring that producers around the U.S. have the ability to access markets and that they have an ability to be successful in trade in the future. So with that, I'll end where I started, which is, again, to thank you, Sara, for hosting this. I want to thank everyone in the room for all that you do to help support this effort. Farmers are no doubt the hardest workers in the U.S. economy. I believe that. And I believe that the folks in this room representing them, the folks in this room working with them, the folks in this room who cover the beat of agriculture are some of the hardest workers in their respective fields as well. So thank you for that, and thank you for having me here this afternoon.
Well, thank you, Doug. That was a great overview, and we really appreciate Ambassador McKalip being here. It is just wonderful to hear all the work that you're doing, and I know the travel that you're investing in trying to break down barriers all around the world. We've got a lot of questions have come in already, so in addition to some of my own, but one thing you mentioned was the sustainability platform that you're embedding into IPEF, and I wondered, a questioner wanted to know whether or not there are some additional efforts by the government to deal with this concept of sustainability, whether it be in IPEF or whether at WTO or Codex. Is there going to be an international standard that can be developed so that we're always talking literally the same concepts? Is that in process?
Sure. Can I actually use your microphone? I think this one, check. Oh, it's on. Thanks, Sara. As I talked about IPEF, probably one of the features that I forgot to mention is the ability to utilize the text that we are developing for other regions around the globe. So there are active discussions in Kenya, for example. There are, in fact, last week for Taiwan, some trade language was signed there. There will be work, and there is work underway right now in South America. So many of the outcomes and the objectives that we're striving for, which is, again, to avoid a one-size-fits-all approach for conservation. And I think it's important that we not end up with the standards before the flexibility, because you could very easily find yourself locked into here's the way it is, and a farmer and rancher in Utah having to implement a conservation practice that was tailored for New Hampshire, wouldn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. So I think IPEF is incredibly important, not just for the markets in those 12 countries around Asia and the Pacific Basin, but quite frankly, this type of approach needs to be replicated and it needs to be utilized in a lot of different areas and to help facilitate additional trade globally for U.S. products.
Well, I think that would be, it would be great if we had, so to speak, apples to apples comparisons that we could make in some of these standards. There are quite a few questions about just in terms of enforcement, and I know that we do have some trade agreements on the books that we have to keep going back with our trading partners. You mentioned Mexico and what's going on there, and also I thought it was interesting. Oftentimes we write about this and we're talking to the corn growers because primarily it's about white corn, but it's about much more. And can you elaborate a little bit more on that, about what the implications are for anybody in the crop protection industry or those who believe in international standards?
Absolutely. So when the U.S. performs a risk assessment on a new biotech varietal. It goes through a lengthy process, and at the end of the day, when it renders its decision, the U.S. government publishes a record of decision and all the supporting documentation to go along with that. The USMCA trade agreement really represents our most recent and our strongest agreement in terms of being very clear that countries follow science, and the three parties that signed USMCA vowed to do exactly that. So for a producer out there who may not be a corn producer, I would say the reason that you see so much attention on this, the reason that the U.S. government wants to ensure, number one, that we get this right, and number two, that this come out the right way and come out the right way for the regulatory system, is that all of the other changes that I mentioned that could be coming for sustainability need to run through a regulatory process internationally that is based upon science. The U.S. is not only a leader of science, but we are a beneficiary when we want to export to make sure that that trading partner also follows science. So this is the very first time that the U.S. has actually, or any country, has exercised the SPS portion of USMCA, and I won't go into all the nitty-gritty details there, but this is an important tool, and again, it's not just standing up for corn growers, it's standing up for all of agriculture and the principle of science and making sure that governments operate the way that they are supposed to, and that the market access is based upon real analysis and real outcomes and not something else.
So could you walk us through a little bit about, now that we've filed the dispute officially, who gets involved, who's on the U.S. team, is this a multi-year process that you anticipate, a several-month process? Just kind of walk us through what's the next steps there.
Sure. And maybe what I'll do is I'll actually use the dairy USMCA process as a little bit of an analogy. So the two countries, or in this case, there may very well be three based upon Canada's actions. We have 30 days to convene the countries for discussions about the actual dispute itself. And this process, depending upon how those discussions go, can result in then the formulation of a panel. And so for the dairy process, the panel is essentially almost like a group of judges that hears the case from both sides. Our attorneys, the USTR legal team, are centrally involved in that because they lay out a case that explains how USMCA has been violated and in what way. And then eventually the USMCA panel would render a decision. So for dairy, that process took about 12 months, if I have my numbers correct in my head. But that's essentially, it provides an ability to get recourse and to ultimately come out with a decision that then can be implemented and will make a difference in correcting whatever problem had arisen in the first place.
Okay. One of the other countries you mentioned was Kenya. And I know there were some Kenyan officials that were saying in March of this year, we think we're going to have an agreement with the U.S. in a year. And we know things don't always move that quickly, but what is the status of some of our efforts to ink some arrangements, trade deals in Africa? And I would assume Kenya being a very likely first mover.
Yeah, so I talked a lot about IPEV in my remarks, and again, I didn't really talk too much about Kenya. We are on a timeline to try as hard as we can to wrap up the IPEV discussions yet in 2023. So I met with Secretary Ross over at her office just before I came here, and she said, in 2023, and I said, yes, that is our goal. And it needs to be because of all the benefits that can come out of that particular agreement. So we want to get it on the books as quickly as we can. Kenya is working on a parallel process. I'm not prepared to sit here this afternoon to point to a specific month. But I think parties on both sides see the potential benefits, and so there is a very strong willingness, and everyone is engaging very, very rapidly to try to get an agreement in place as soon as we can between us and Kenya.
Okay. One of our other questioners wants to know about how does the enforcement mechanism work in an IPEF? What is going to be the basis for making sure everybody stays true to their agreed upon principles?
Yeah, I think one piece of, I don't know if I would call it misinformation, or maybe it's lack of, and I get it, it's hard because you've got countries doing trade negotiations. It's not always easy to know every step along the way. But I think some of the strongest provisions, for example, on sanitary and phytosanitary provisions that we've seen to date are a baseline for what we're working to get out of IPEV. So the idea being that you have countries that are really agreeing to solid commitments on those kinds of arrangements and that type of way to trade from a regulatory perspective. So, that's the objective here, and that's what we're working for in IPEV, and that will be a model for other places that we go as well.
Well, it's amazing to me. We've run through so much time already, and there's a lot more questions here as well as I could ask more, but I know you have a very busy schedule, Ambassador, and I just can't thank you enough. So thanks for being here, thanks for engaging with our audience, and thanks for all the work you're doing around the globe to advance U.S. agriculture. So again, let's thank Ambassador McKalip for being here.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.